grew up listening to stories. I myself am a story, and I wish to leave a story behind me, as all of us leave stories. But the thing is, how people read those stories, that is more important. When I was a small kid, I'm talking about 60s, I was living in Shimla, and the only entertainment available to us at that point of time was listening to stories. My father would read stories to me, and there was one particular story which I was in love with, because I was not a very pretty girl at that time, very sickly, weak, dark complexion as compared to my elder sister. So there was one particular aspect, one particular portion in the Mahabharata where Bhima, the second prince, second brother of this Kuru Pandavas, he finds a girl in the forest, and this girl is in fact depicted as a demon in the Mahabharata. And this girl, when she looks at this prince, she transforms herself into a beautiful damsel, and both of them get in love and marry each other. Now, when my father would read this story to me, I would be imagining how one can have such power, some magic at one's hand, that one can transform oneself into a pretty looking woman, because that is the dream of every young girl, I think. So I would time and again ask my father, how could she do it? How she could transform herself into a pretty woman? So my father would say she was a demon, she could do it. My mother, who would be doing her household works, but since we lived in a small house, where whatever we talked, she was audible to every other member of the house, she would butt in, saying very emphatically, no, she was a goddess, don't call her demon. Now, both of them will have some argument, and in between I'll forget about the story and would be just thinking about how can somebody transform oneself into a beautiful woman. So the fact is, I grew up listening to and loving a character who was depicted or represented in a diametrically opposite representations. My father had a different label for her, my mother had a different label for her, and at 6 or 7 years old that I was, I just didn't know whom to believe. Now, when I started to read, my father, he must be tired of reading stories to me, so now he taught me to read myself, and he brought one book for me, and it was Cinderella's story. Now, everybody knew, in my school about Cinderella's story, but I never had heard about Cinderella because that was a character from a foreign land which I was not very connected to. But when I looked at the storybook, it had different colorful pictures, and the same story came to my mind. How could a small girl, she was beautiful, of course, this is what the writer says in the book, but how could she transform herself with the help of a fairy, of course, into a princess? And this girl goes to a ball, meets a prince, and the prince falls in love with the girl. Now, this was the story which my Hidimba also had. Hidimba also fell in love with a prince, and Cinderella also falls in love with the prince. Now the changing or turning points in both the stories are, Hidimba was left behind in the forest by the prince. When it's time for them to move out of the forest, the prince is such a dedicated son to his mother that he listens to his mother's diktats, I'll say, and my father, when he would read the story, the next part of the story to me, I would say, what happened, whether they got married or not, because it was very, important for a girl to know that if somebody falls in love, the second thing is getting married to that person. So he would say, yes, they got married. Now I was happy. But then he would read the portion that it was time for them to leave the forest, and this boy, a man I'd say, Bhima, he leaves the forest and leaving behind his wife. I would be very sad, and I'll ask my father, why would he leave? Why he left his young pretty wife in the forest? And again the answer would be the same very answer, because she was a demon. And now when I read Cinderella's story, I was a bit perturbed. I was a bit afraid. What will happen? Cinderella goes back to her home, whether her prince would find Cinderella or not. But luckily, the prince finds Cinderella, and both of them get married, and both of them live happily ever after as king and queen. So what I want to say is that I grew up listening to a story about Hidimba, who was depicted as a demon, and then I thought that she was a demon, but my mother said that no, she was not a demon, she was a goddess. I didn't know whether she was a goddess or a demon, but I never ever was able to relate to Hidimba as a woman. That was, I'm ashamed of, acknowledging it today, that I never for a second thought of Hidimba as a woman. I thought of her as a goddess which was on a very high pedestal. I could not reach her. And a demon was much below, and I would not ever wish to become a demon, even if that would have granted me many magical powers to look beautiful also. So the thing is, I never related to Hidimba as a woman, and that is, in fact, perhaps the nature wanted me to have a lesson out of it, and it was much later in my life when I was in my 50s and I was doing my research on Mahabharata, and I was able to see some aspects of Hidimba as a woman, all characters as a woman, these women and men, and I was able to relate to this story on a platform where they were living human beings like me and you, not gods and goddesses or demons as we perceive them to be. It was at that point of time what happened that I had in my work life some tiff with a person who was considered to be very powerful. And I too raised my voice of protest. But as usual, my voice of protest was considered to be a voice of a protesting woman, feeble, lone, and was somehow muffled in the corridors of power. And when this happened to me in my personal life, then I thought, yes, this must have happened with Hidimba as well. She was much too weak to raise a point, to raise a protest against the treatment which was given to her by the Guru princess. But she might have raised her voice, but who knows what might have happened while she was left in the forest. But the story goes on in the Mahabharata that there is no reference of Hidimba after that. And unfortunately, she was left now I was able to see Hidimba as a woman. And when she was left in the village, she was pregnant with a child of the husband who so callously leaves her alone in the forest. Forest always stands for danger. And since we know the story that Hidimba had colluded or taken part with this Guru people in getting her brother killed, so I'm sure that she must not have any friend in the forest. She was living alone. She didn't have any father. She didn't have any brother. She was carrying a child in her womb, but was left alone in the jungle to fend for herself and also for her unborn child. Now I was able to relate to Hidimba, and I suddenly thought that even if she had protested, I'm sure that nobody listened to her story. Nobody was able to interpret her story the way she wanted to. And I thought that who are the people, those who write stories, and what are the stories what angle they take on writing the stories. And when I thought of her story, I thought it was the story which was written to justify some very unjust and unfair actions on the part of the, ruling princes. So when they wrote the story of Mahabharata, how could they write that one of their, such a brave, warrior, the second prince in the Mahabharata, a ruling dynasty from the Pandava side, how could he be so callous to leave a, young mother, to-be mother, his legally wedded wife in forest? Because Hidimba was married to Bhima with the due permission of the mother of Bhima and his elder brother. So there was nothing like that it was a marriage which the family had not sanctioned. And coming back to Cinderella's story, here is a happy ending, and in the Hidimba's case it was an unhappy ending from the part of from the angle of a woman left alone. So when I read both the stories, I started dreaming about the life of Cinderella. I didn't relate to Hidimba when I was a small girl, but later on I related to Hidimba more. I'm trying to say that these stories, when we read stories to our children, we read them from the angle which we want them to believe on. When my mother said something about Hidimba. She was talking about Hidimba as a goddess because she believed, like a simple Hindu woman, in gods and goddesses. When my father would read the story, he would call her a demon. So I would just show you that it is all the perspective. This is my Hidimba, a simple woman. Here I have tried to give just some signs to her, and she transforms into a goddess. Just a crown on her head and a little, something in her eyes, which we expect from the gods, and making her look like a goddess. And see the third picture. So this is how a demon would look. I have added nothing except two horns and protruding teeth to her, and the same woman is depicted in two different ways. And unfortunately, we are more concerned about the, say, goddess part and the demon part, and forgetting about the woman part. Now, when something bad happened in my personal life and I related with Hidimba, then this thing came to me. Now, it was at this time that I went to this temple, Hidimba Devi temple in Manali. Now, suddenly all those memories of my childhood came rushing back to me, and the same query in my mind, how did she really look like, was all the time, in my mind. I was very inquisitive, very curious that now I'm going to the temple of the goddess, and at least they would have something to represent her as. And I wanted to see how she would look like. And when I reached the temple, I saw outside some very, some pictures, some depictions of certain things, horns and all that, which gave me the same image of Hidimba as a demon. Because suddenly I was filled with, say, feeling of as if I didn't feel very comfortable. But I went inside. So there I found there was no picture, nothing that I could look at. There were just signs of, or say, 2 feet, which were engraved in stone. And the priest over there said, this is what we worship, and this is Hidimba for us. I said, can I take a picture? He said, no, and there was a big sign over there, please do not take a picture. So I didn't take any picture, and I came back. But still, I was in dilemma that I think her to be a woman, that here is the priest also not saying that she was a woman. This priest said that she was a very powerful deity. And those who, do not know much about Hidimba as a local or deity in Himachal, in western Himalaya, I would like to say that she is such a powerful deity that unless she comes to the Shera festival, that the Shera festival would not start. All the local deities, they would wait for Goddess Hidimba to come on the Shera ground, only then the celebration would start. And she comes in a very mighty manner, as if, when functions start and somebody who's very big, he always make his entrance at the last moment. So everybody looks at him and he gets noticed. Same way, Hidimba also comes as the last person to come on the Shera ground, and only then the celebration starts. Now, again one question which comes to every rational mind: how could a woman who was depicted as a demon, how could she raise herself to such heights that she is worshipped, and that too in such a way by people, not just one small village, but whole area, this Lahore, Spiti, Geelong, Kullu, Manali, everybody. There are temples dedicated to Hidimba in even Mandi, Bilaspur. How come she became a goddess? Now, I do not believe in miracles. I don't think that people say that she worshipped God and she became a very pious woman, as if she was not pious before that, and then people started worshipping her and she became a goddess. I believe that after she was left alone to fend for her child, what she did, she raised her child single-handedly, and she made her child to be such a big warrior, such a strong warrior, that these very Pandavas, those who had left Hidimba alone in the forest, they had to come during Mahabharata war to seek help from Hidimba and requesting her to send her son to take part in the Mahabharata war from their side. So at that time, all other kings from that particular region, they were siding from the Kaurava side. But her son, Ghatotkacha, was the only one who was taking side from the Pandava side. And this son was also killed in the war. So Hidimba was left with no one. But I think, leaving alone this part, that it was her intrinsic power, the power as a woman, which she was able to realize when she was left alone in the jungle to fend for herself, to find a place for herself, because she had to re-establish herself in the jungle among people, those who perhaps hated her for getting her brother killed by this princess. Now, she must have been very different. She must have unleashed the power within, and only then she came up to this status, so that people, her own people, they started worshipping her or relegating her some, such a stage where she was above them. So, if we forget about all those labels and we just consider Hidimba as a woman, we just learn one lesson from Hidimba, that it is the power within ourselves which we must come with. And this power comes out only when we are under very trying circumstances, when we know that there is no one to look after us, when we know that no helping hand will provide us any support. Now, again, I'll come back to another childhood story of mine. That was this Cinderella. Just imagine what might have happened if Cinderella was left alone with a child in her womb by the prince. Would there be any Cinderella story? Would you ever read the Cinderella story to your kids? Never. Because I don't think that Cinderella would have, raised herself to a level where she would become a goddess. But here is my Hidimba, who raised her voice and she became a goddess. And the lesson which I learned through my bad experience, that you do not have to find support from outside. You have to channelize this power which lies within you. And as my topic, the name of my topic which I gave to my topic is that listen to the silence. Silence sometimes speaks more than words. It was silence of Hidimba which nobody has interpreted. I have interpreted it in my own way, and I think that if we just go on listening to silence around us, we'll find that there are n number of people around us, women, underprivileged, those who do not get any platform to raise their voices. And it is for us to help them get a voice, give a voice to their silence, and at least listen to their silence. So now I'll show some pictures, and with that I'll conclude my talk. This is the exterior of Hidimba temple in Manali, which I talked about. Awesome. And again gives us a feeling that yes, here lives a demon. This is how people, those who have belief in Hidimba as a goddess, they worship. Here this tree stands for Ghatotkacha, her son. It's not worshipped as a tree, it's worshipped as a something which is noble. And this is how, I just forgot one more thing which I would share with permission from the chair. There is another temple dedicated to Hidimba in Kelong, Jalma, and I went to that temple also to see how Hidimba might have looked like. I went to that temple, there was nothing inside except a small stone slab. And I asked my local friend that, do you have any idea how she might have looked like? He said, how does it matter? And that was the answer to my question, that how does it matter whether she looked like a demon or she looked like a goddess? She was a woman, and a noble woman. And on that temple, I found tridents, which is a symbol for Durga Ma in Hindu mythology, and people had dedicated n number of so many tridents everywhere in the temple. There was no writing on the wall, do not take a photograph. But still I did not take one single photograph inside the shrine, because somehow I felt as if I would be disturbing her tranquility, I would be intruding in her privacy, which she has, so honorably maintained till date. So I didn't take any photograph, but I was satisfied that I came back more empowered, that here is a woman that we must imbibe, we must look up to, although she has been silenced in the Mahabharata by certain people with vested interests. Thank you.